Welcome back. Today's viewer story, sent in by Martha Vance, is perhaps the most shocking tale of family betrayal we have ever featured. After 25 years of complete silence, an experimental surgery restored Martha's hearing. But instead of celebrating, she chose to keep her miracle a secret. What she overheard was an evil plot by her son and daughter-in-law to steal her life savings and lock her away. Get ready for the ultimate revenge story, where the power of listening changes everything. Have a similar story of betrayal or a strategic comeback? Email us at womenstoriescgmail.com. Now, let's dive into Martha's reckoning. The first sound I heard after 25 years of profound silence was my son Jason calling me a worthless burden to his wife, Amanda. 2 hours later, I walked into their kitchen with a serene smile on my face, pretending I hadn't heard a single syllable. That was the moment I realized my family had absolutely no idea what hurricane was coming for them. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where in the world you are watching from. I want to know your story, too. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. 4 weeks ago, Dr. Bennett, at a non-disclosed hospital name, performed what he cautiously called a miracle procedure on my severely damaged inner ears. 25 years earlier, a hit-and-run driver had slammed into my car, leaving me completely deaf, and my beloved husband, Thomas, dead. I'd spent 2 decades mastering lip reading, teaching myself advanced sign language, and raising Jason the best I could as a single mother. The surgery was highly experimental, ridiculously expensive, and only carried a 25% success rate. Jason had been furious when I'd insisted on using the bulk of my late husband's insurance savings for it. "Mom, you're 70 years old. Why put yourself through this risk? Why waste the money?" he'd argued, his face tight with annoyance, his lips moving in the slow, deliberate rhythm he'd perfected over the years. But something deep inside me, a desire to hear the birds sing and the simple sound of my own voice, refused to surrender hope. The morning I awoke in the hospital recovery room, the world was no longer muffled. I heard the sharp, high-pitched beep of a monitor beside my bed. Then, a nurse's voice, clear as crystal, saying, "Good morning, Mrs. Vance. How are you feeling?" I cried for nearly 2 hours straight, not from pain, but from the overwhelming, raw, beautiful shock of pure sound. The world had sound again. Dr. Bennett was amazed. "Your hearing is actually bordering on supernatural, Martha," he explained, his voice vibrant. "It's like your brain aggressively compensated for all those lost years. You'll need to adjust slowly. Sounds might seem overwhelming at first." He was absolutely right. Everything seemed amplified. The constant hum of the ventilation system, the distant rumble of traffic, the whispered conversations in the corridor. It was then that I made a decision that would change the course of my life, and theirs. Instead of announcing my success immediately, I decided to surprise my family. I vividly imagined their faces lighting up when I responded to their normal voices for the first time in over 2 decades. I pictured Jason's amazement, Amanda's tears of joy, and my grandchildren, Oliver and Sophia, finally having genuine, flowing conversations with their grandmother. I spent a full week in recovery practicing my poker face with the dedicated nursing staff. "Remember," I told them, signing with exaggerated slowness, "not a word to anyone. This is going to be the most wonderful surprise." They thought it was sweet, this devoted grandmother planning such a loving reveal. The day before my discharge, Jason visited. He sat beside my bed, moving his lips in the heavy, exaggerated way he'd always used, assuming I was reading them. "Mom, Amanda has cleaned out the sunroom. You'll stay with us during the initial recovery." His voice was strained, clearly conveying burden and fatigue. I nodded and smiled, giving him my customary double thumbs up. What I didn't realize was that I was about to discover who my family really was, thanks to my restored hearing. And let me tell you, the cold, calculated truth was far more devastating than 25 years of silence could ever have been. I arrived at Jason and Amanda's house on a non-disclosed suburban street, carrying the small canvas bag I'd packed at the hospital. The two-story home, which I had gifted them the down payment for, looked immaculate. Amanda opened the front door with what I now instantly recognized as a forced, tight smile. Her lips moved in the slow, painstaking way she'd adopted since my accident. "Welcome home, Martha. We are so glad you are feeling a little better." Her voice, while pleasant, held a subtle edge of impatience, as if she were delivering a performance she strongly resented. I gave her my usual grateful nod and let her guide me inside. The temporary guest room was downstairs, converted from the laundry room. Amanda had decorated it with neutral, expensive, A Non-Disclosed home decor brand items. "The half bath is just around the corner," Amanda said, her mouth moving with exaggerated precision. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." She patted my arm and quickly retreated. For 25 years, I'd lived in relative isolation. Jason visited regularly. Amanda was present half the time, and my grandchildren only appeared for major events. I'd convinced myself that I was grateful for whatever contact they provided. Now, sitting on the edge of the hard guest bed, I could hear everything. The refrigerator humming, a car alarm 2 blocks away, and the subtle, rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Jason arrived home from his office at exactly 6 p.m., his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. "How's the patient?" he asked Amanda. They were in the kitchen, clearly assuming I was resting and, more importantly, deaf. "Fine, I suppose," Amanda replied. Her voice now sounded completely different, less careful, naturally annoyed. "She looks tired, but that's expected. Hopefully this recovery goes quickly. I can't keep canceling my non-disclosed fitness brand classes." There it was, the first brutal crack in the facade. Jason wasn't concerned about my health. He was worried about the disruption my presence caused to their meticulously structured, privileged lives. The truth was starting to drown out the silence I had lived with for so long. That evening at dinner, I became an unwitting audience to a performance carefully rehearsed over 2 decades. I watched my family's faces while they executed what I now instantly understood was elaborate theater designed purely for my benefit. Jason sliced the baked salmon with exaggerated slow-motion gestures, ensuring I could clearly read every action. Amanda pointed to each dish as she served it, slowly mouthing the names: roasted asparagus, quinoa, lemon herb sauce. Oliver, my 22-year-old grandson, was home from his non-disclosed university name for a short break. He sat across from me, occasionally waving and giving me a quick, practiced smile when he remembered I was there. Sophia, 19, and in her final year of secondary school, barely lifted her head from her phone during the entire meal. For 25 years, I'd rationalized their behavior as the understandable, natural consequence of our communication barrier. I was profoundly wrong. "Grandma looks reasonably well, doesn't she?" Jason said to Amanda, speaking loudly and clearly, as if I were a piece of furniture in the room. This habit of discussing a deaf person in their presence, assuming zero comprehension, was something I'd never fully considered until now. "Did the doctor give a definite positive then?" Amanda asked, cutting her food with sharp, irritated movements. "Too soon to tell," Jason replied, lowering his voice slightly, but still perfectly audible to me. "Dr. Bennett said it could take weeks to determine if there's any real improvement. But honestly, even if it works partially, she's 70. How much practical difference could it realistically make to our lives?" I maintained my expression, the bland, pleasant neutrality I'd perfected over the years. Inside, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm. This was my son discussing his mother's potentially life-altering medical breakthrough, with the clinical indifference usually reserved for discussing a car repair bill. "What did the doctor say about long-term supervision?" Amanda pressed, her voice hard. "We need to plan." "Same as before," Jason said, adjusting his napkin. "She can probably manage independently for a little while longer. But we need to seriously start thinking about alternatives." Alternatives. The word hung in the air like a looming executioner. Oliver looked up from his plate, sensing the tension. "Are you talking about moving Grandma to the Brookside retreat? But she's been taking care of herself just fine." Amanda exchanged a significant look with Jason. "It's complicated, honey. Martha is aging, and her needs are becoming more complex. Elderly people with a hearing disability face special challenges. We want what's truly best for your grandmother." I continued eating, maintaining the same benign, blank expression. My mind, however, was now racing at a mile a minute. They weren't discussing my future with me. They were discussing what to do about me. After dinner, I followed my usual routine, clearing my own plate and helping to rinse the dishes while Amanda quickly put away the leftovers. The kitchen window faced the large backyard where Jason was now fiddling with the gas grill. "He's avoiding coming back inside," Amanda muttered under her breath, not realizing I was standing right beside her. I turned my head slightly, pretending I was attempting to read her lips. She simply waved her hand dismissively and walked away. But I'd heard enough to realize that even Amanda understood Jason's discomfort and lack of genuine desire to have me in their house. That night, lying in the uncomfortable, overly floral guest room bed, I listened to my family's real, unguarded conversations through the thin floorboards. Jason and Amanda's bedroom was directly above mine, and the sound carried clearly, now that my hearing was acute. "How long is she really staying?" Amanda demanded, her voice tight with irritation. "Dr. Bennett said a week for observation, maybe 2 if there are post-op issues," Jason replied. 2 weeks, Jason. 2 weeks of having to walk on eggshells, of watching every single word, of constantly pretending we're delighted to have her here. I can't live like this. "I know, but what choice do we have? She's my mother." "Your mother, who could have saved everyone a lot of trouble by simply accepting that this expensive surgery was a colossal waste of money. Now we have to manage the fallout." I pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cool April air. This was their true perception of me. A trouble, an obligation, a financial drain they had to manage rather than a person they loved. They had no idea I could hear every word, and that was about to become the single, most catastrophic mistake of their calculated lives. The next morning, I woke to the distinct sound of Amanda talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice carried clearly through the vents, and I realized she was speaking to her own mother about me. "No, Mother. The surgery really doesn't change anything significant," Amanda was saying, her voice a confidential murmur. "Even if her hearing is partially restored, she'll still be elderly, still need supervision, still ultimately be our responsibility." I sat up, my heart pounding a furious rhythm. Amanda was discussing my future as if I were a cumbersome asset they needed to liquidate. Jason thinks we should wait and see, but honestly, I don't see the point. The Brookside Retreat has an opening in their desirable assisted living wing. If we act quickly, we could have her settled there by the end of spring. The Brookside Retreat. I knew the facility. A large, impersonal structure on the outskirts of town that reeked of commercial disinfectant and had a notorious reputation for warehousing residents rather than providing genuine care. I understand it's expensive, Amanda continued, dropping her voice again. But Jason's consultancy is doing incredibly well, and Martha has her own considerable savings. Plus, there's the house. My house. The small, cozy property I'd lived in for 45 years, the home I'd raised Jason in after Thomas died, where I'd maintained my fiercely guarded independence. They were discussing selling my home to pay for my eventual imprisonment. "I'll call them this afternoon," I heard her tell her mother. "Jason doesn't need to know the fine details until we have everything properly arranged. It'll be easier for everyone that way." Easier for everyone except me, apparently. The game was over. The performance was done. Now the real game had begun. Jason emerged from upstairs, already dressed for his consultancy work in his crisp and non-disclosed designer brand suit and a brightly colored tie. He kissed Amanda perfunctorily and squeezed my shoulder with a brief, tired gesture. "Have a productive day, Mom," he said, mouthing the words as he always did. "Amanda will take care of you." After he left, I watched Amanda settle into what appeared to be her daily routine. Aggressive, efficient cleaning of the kitchen, starting a load of laundry, and then disappearing into her spacious home office to manage her highly curated social media presence for her A Non-Disclosed Wealth Management Service. I spent the rest of the morning moving quietly through my temporary confinement, listening intently to the sounds of a house I had contributed so much to, yet was now apparently being expelled from. The walls were tragically thin, and I could hear Amanda making several crucial phone calls, her voice carrying clearly through the heating vents and the slightly open office door. The first call confirmed my worst fears. It was to the Brookside Retreat. "Yes, I'd like to follow up on the assisted living inquiry for my mother-in-law," she said, her tone smooth and professionally concerned. "She is 70, recently had a minor surgery, and we feel she needs more supervision than we can comfortably provide, given her decades of isolation." The lies flowed from her mouth with astonishing ease. I was neither failing mentally nor physically. My isolation was a result of my deafness, not my incompetence. What I needed was a family, not a prison cell. The second call was to a real estate agency, a non-disclosed real estate firm. "We may have a property coming available very soon," Amanda said, her voice laced with excitement. "A lovely small ranch home, very well maintained in the desirable Willowbrook neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a surprisingly large backyard. Yes, I believe it will sell very quickly once listed." My house, my beloved home, where I had spent 45 years of my life, where Thomas and I had raised Jason. They were not only planning to sell it, but they were already calculating the profit margins before I was even aware they wanted me out of it. The third call was the one that truly broke the emotional dam within me. It was to Jason, presumably at his office. "It's me. I spoke to both places this morning," Amanda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The Brookside Retreat has a spot, and a non-disclosed real estate agent thinks the house will sell within a month of listing. We need to move on this before your mother gets too comfortable with the idea of staying independent." There was a long pause while Jason responded. I strained to hear his end, but could only hear Amanda's continuation. "I know it seems fast, but think about it logically, Jason. If the surgery works, she'll be more demanding, wanting to travel and engage. If it doesn't work, she'll be depressed and harder to manage. Either way, it's far better to make the transition now, while she's still adjusting and disoriented from the hospitalization. Another pause. No, we absolutely do not tell her anything until the papers are arranged. You know how stubborn she can be. Remember when she refused to give up driving. This is the same principle. Sometimes you simply have to make necessary decisions for people who cannot see what is truly best for them. I sat in the guest room, my hands shaking as I automatically folded a towel over and over. They weren't just planning to betray me and seize my assets. They were congratulating themselves on their clever foresight, protecting me from my own supposed inability to make rational decisions. They had twisted my hope for reconnection into clinical evidence of my incompetence. That afternoon, Oliver, my grandson, came home from his college classes. I heard him talking to Amanda in the kitchen. "How is Grandma doing?" he asked casually. "Fine," Amanda replied, her voice immediately sharpening into the concerned parent tone. "She's settling in. But yes, we are seriously considering the Brookside retreat. But she's not sick or failing, Mom. She just can't hear well." "There's significantly more to it than that, Oliver," Amanda insisted, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Your grandmother has been profoundly isolated for decades. She doesn't understand how much the world has changed, how vulnerable she is now. The surgery was simply a desperate attempt to avoid facing reality." "What reality?" "That she's elderly, Oliver. That she needs people who can make complex decisions for her because she can't see the bigger picture anymore." I listened to Amanda poison my grandson's mind with carefully constructed lies, teaching him that elderly people were inherently incompetent and that family members who outsourced their care were merely being compassionate. By late afternoon, I had heard enough to understand the full scope of their calculated cruelty. My house, my life savings, my independence, all were on the chopping block. It was time to make my own calls. While Amanda was at her mid-afternoon A Non-Disclosed Pilates studio session, I quietly used their home phone, speaking softly but clearly. The first call was to a non-disclosed bank. "I'd like to schedule an immediate appointment to review my accounts and discuss some substantial changes to my beneficiaries and account access," I told them. The second call was to a lawyer. Not the elder law attorney Amanda had been consulting, but a family law specialist I found with excellent reviews for defending elderly clients against financial exploitation. His name was Mr. James. The third call was the most strategic, to a private investigator who specialized in documenting white-collar fraud and elder abuse cases. By the end of that day, I had laid the initial trap. They had made one crucial mistake. They gave me the gift of hearing their true intentions while still believing I was deaf and helpless. And I was going to use that advantage in ways they never saw coming. Friday morning arrived, and I made my final, irrevocable decision. I was going to give Jason and Amanda exactly what they had given me, a devastating surprise they would never see coming. The element of surprise, which had been the source of my joy, was about to become their ruin. While Amanda was at her A Non-Disclosed Pilates studio class and Jason was at his consultancy firm, I quietly began gathering the necessary digital evidence. Amanda, in her arrogant confidence, had left her home computer logged in, with her main email account open. What I discovered was far worse than simple greed. It was a long-term, calculated scheme. They had been living well beyond their means for at least 3 years. Jason's consultancy was secretly struggling, hemorrhaging money due to poor management and reliance on over-leveraged debt. They had 4 different credit cards maxed out, and they had been aggressively counting on the liquidity from my savings and house equity to solve their burgeoning financial crisis long before my surgery was even scheduled. The correspondence revealed that Amanda had been planning this betrayal for months. She had meticulously researched the Brookside retreat, calculated my liquid assets, and even consulted with an elder law attorney about the easiest way to secure temporary guardianship over an aging, isolated relative. More heartbreakingly, I found correspondence with interior designers detailing renovations for my beloved ranch-style home once it became available. She had elaborate plans for tearing down the wall of Thomas's cherished workshop, the one he used for woodworking, to create what she called a stunning modern open concept space perfect for entertaining. They weren't just stealing my home. They were planning to erase every physical trace of the life Thomas and I had built there. I finalized my plans with my new legal team. My lawyer, Mr. James, a sharp family law specialist, was already preparing a comprehensive protection order that would prevent anyone from making decisions about my finances, housing, or medical care without a court order. He had also drafted a detailed complaint documenting the attempted financial exploitation and emotional abuse. The most critical component of the plan was gathering undeniable proof of their spoken intent. This is where Janet Morrison, the private investigator, came in. We arranged a quick, discreet meeting at a non-disclosed cafe across town. Janet was a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s. I explained the situation, focusing on the audio evidence I needed. "The key is proving intent, Martha," Janet explained quietly. "They can claim they were helping you, but if we have them on tape confirming they're selling the house and draining the savings without your consent, that's game over." Later that afternoon, under the guise of the cleaning service Amanda used, Janet slipped into the house. She quickly installed a discreet, high-quality audio recording device hidden near the heating vent in the sunroom, which carried sound perfectly from the adjacent kitchen and the master bedroom above. For the next 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, I continued my performance as the deaf, compliant, recovering invalid. But all the while, the hidden device was compiling the most damning evidence imaginable. I recorded Amanda talking to her mother about how relieved she would be when I was finally settled at the retreat. I recorded Jason talking to his business partner Marcus during a phone conference. "The timing is perfect," Jason explained clearly into the phone. "If we move quickly, we can get Mom settled before she starts asking questions about her finances. She's sitting on almost a non-disclosed high figure in savings, plus the house equity. That should cover Brookside for years, maybe even a decade, if we invest wisely." "What if she objects?" Marcus asked. Jason's reply was chilling in its casual cruelty. "She won't have much choice. Amanda's researched the legal requirements for elderly care decisions. If we can document that she's not capable of managing her affairs independently, and we will, we can get temporary guardianship." "Is she actually incapable?" Marcus pressed. Jason paused, and I heard him shift in his chair. "She will be once she understands what's happening. The shock of losing her independence will probably trigger depression, confusion, maybe even some cognitive decline. It's common in elderly people facing major life transitions. They weren't just planning to steal my money and my home. They were counting on the trauma of their betrayal to justify their actions. They were anticipating my mental collapse. It was diabolical in its calculated foresight." By Monday, I had more than enough evidence. I had documented Amanda's calls to Brookside, her correspondence with 3 real estate agents, and Jason's explicit confirmation that they intended to claim I was incompetent to seize my assets. I realized their biggest mistake was not the betrayal itself, but their reliance on the belief that my distress would render me helpless. They had twisted my hope for reconnection into evidence of my incompetence. But they had given me a weapon, the gift of hearing, and I was going to wield it with precision. I made my final calls to Mr. James and Janet Morrison. Everything was ready. It was time for the curtain to rise on their worst nightmare. Tuesday evening, I made my final, quiet phone call to Mr. James. Everything was in place, legally and strategically. They were preparing for the final step of their calculated betrayal, the medical appointment that would provide the perceived proof of my cognitive frailty. "They are planning to poison the appointment tomorrow, Mr. James," I told him, speaking softly from the quiet confines of the laundry room turned guest room. "They intend to convince Dr. Bennett that I am experiencing confusion and depression following the surgery, laying the groundwork for their incompetency claims." "I understand, Martha," the lawyer replied, his voice grave. "I'll be there. Are you absolutely certain you are ready for the finality of this, the moment we reveal what you know? Once that door is opened, there is no going back. There was no going back the moment they decided to steal my life and sell my late husband's legacy," I responded, my voice infused with a steely calm I hadn't known I possessed. "They have been living in my house, eating food I helped pay for, and planning to steal my life savings while pretending to care. I am more than ready. I need you to be present in the waiting room at Dr. Bennett's office." The next morning, Wednesday, arrived with Amanda in full organizational mode. She had scheduled my follow-up appointment with Dr. Bennett for 11 a.m. She was buzzing with barely concealed anticipation, entirely confident that she was about to seize control of my life with full medical legitimacy. While Amanda bustled around the house preparing for what she believed would be a routine medical checkup, I sat quietly, making my final personal preparations. I meticulously reviewed the file Janet Morrison had compiled, her logs of Amanda's correspondence with the Brookside retreat, the real estate appraisals, and the most damning evidence, the audio files. I also made a final, crucial call to my bank. Yes, I am confirming the transfer of all liquid assets from the joint savings account to the newly established A Non-Disclosed Trust account, I instructed the representative. Please ensure that the access credentials for the previous account are immediately terminated for all parties other than myself. The house, my $200,000 in savings, the future I had planned, it was all safely shielded from their grasp. The car ride to Dr. Bennett's office, a trip I had anticipated with joy just weeks earlier, was now thick with tension, at least for Amanda. She was excessively cheerful, occasionally patting my hand and speaking in her slow, deliberate, lip-reading voice. "Don't you worry about a thing, Martha. Dr. Bennett just wants to check your marvelous progress." But I watched her real face when she thought I wasn't looking. She was excited, almost gleeful, like a predator about to spring her trap. She saw this as the final strategic move before securing her financial windfall. We arrived at a non-disclosed medical center. In the sterile waiting room, Amanda sat beside me, subtly positioning herself to look like the concerned, dedicated daughter-in-law. "I have already informed the nurse that I will be accompanying you into the examination room to assist with communication," she whispered, giving me a smug, knowing smile. I looked across the waiting room and saw a man, tall, serious, carrying a recognizable briefcase. It was Mr. James. He gave me the briefest, almost imperceptible nod. The trap was set. When the nurse called my name, Amanda immediately sprang to her feet. "I'll come with you," she announced, already guiding me toward the examination room. Dr. Bennett greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Vance, wonderful to see you. How are you feeling?" Before I could respond, Amanda launched into her meticulously rehearsed performance. "Doctor, I am profoundly concerned about Martha's adjustment since the surgery. She seems confused, withdrawn. She's been staying with us, and we've noticed some truly troubling signs," she continued, smoothly weaving her web of lies. "Difficulty making decisions, sleeping poorly, confusion about financial matters. She was laying the medical groundwork for my state-sanctioned incarceration at the Brookside retreat." I sat quietly, watching Amanda weave her deceit, knowing that in about 60 seconds she was going to discover that her prey was no longer helpless. Dr. Bennett turned his attention to me, his expression now serious. "Mrs. Vance, how would you describe your experience since the surgery?" I looked directly at him, then directly at Amanda, and spoke in a clear, strong voice. A voice that had been silenced for 25 years, now fully resonant with power and purpose. "Dr. Bennett," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my face. "My hearing is perfect. In fact, it's better than it's been in 25 years. I can hear everything, including the conversations my family has been having about stealing my money and putting me in a nursing home against my will." Amanda's face instantly went white. Her jaw dropped, and her mouth opened and closed silently, gasping for air. Her performance was officially over. That's not," she stammered, shaking her head violently. "Mr. James," I called toward the door. "You can come in now." The look of pure horror on Amanda's face as my lawyer walked into the room was worth every single minute of those 25 silent years. The real fun was finally about to begin. The silence in Dr. Bennett's office, once my companion, was now a thunderous stage for Amanda's humiliation. She sat frozen, her carefully constructed mask shattered into a million pieces. The meticulously applied makeup around her eyes began to crinkle as the shock turned into pure, cold dread. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely audible, the sudden lack of exaggerated lip movement a clear indication of her terror. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I replied, my voice steady and strong, "was your assumption that I would remain deaf and helpless while you and Jason conspired to steal my home and my future." I turned to Dr. Bennett, whose face was a mask of professional astonishment. "Dr. Bennett, as you can see, there is no medical reason for me to be incapacitated or to require supervision. In fact, my lawyer, Mr. James, is here to initiate proceedings against my son and his wife for attempted financial exploitation and conspiracy to commit elder abuse." Mr. James stepped forward, placing a thick, formal binder on the examination table between us. "Mrs. Vance has been documenting conversations for the past 5 days, including detailed plans to sell her property in Willowbrook and liquidate her retirement savings to fund her unwanted placement at the Brookside retreat. We have irrefutable audio and digital evidence of their intent." "This is outrageous," Amanda finally gasped, her voice cracking. "We were trying to help her. She was isolated." "Help?" I laughed, a full, resonant sound that felt liberating after decades of silence. "You were trying to help yourselves to my A Non-Disclosed High Figure savings. You told the real estate agent my property was coming available soon. You told your mother that I was a burden you couldn't wait to be rid of." I looked directly into her horrified eyes. "I heard you tell Jason that if the surgery worked, I'd be more demanding, and if it failed, I'd be harder to manage. You were counting on my emotional trauma to justify your claim of my cognitive decline. Dr. Bennett moved swiftly to take control of the situation. Mrs. Sinclair, based on this documentation and the exceptional results of your auditory function, I can confirm there is no medical basis for any claim of incompetency. I will be issuing a statement confirming your full mental capacity. Thank you, doctor, I said. That is all the medical confirmation we require. I turned back to Amanda, who was now visibly shaking. Now, Amanda, you need to call Jason immediately, I instructed. You can let him know that his mother is not only hearing perfectly, but also thinking quite clearly. Clear enough to have acted decisively this morning. Amanda fumbled for her a non-disclosed brand phone, her fingers barely able to punch the numbers. She held the phone to her ear, tears finally starting to well up. David? It's me, she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. Something terrible has happened. Your mother, she can hear. She's been listening to everything. She knows about Brookside and the house. She listened for a moment, recoiling as Jason's furious, distorted yell came through the phone's speaker. Even I could make out the word impossible. No, I don't know how she knows. She's here with a lawyer. She's saying the money is gone, Amanda cried, collapsing back into the chair. I took control of the conversation, taking the phone from Amanda's trembling hand. Jason, I said calmly into the phone. This is your mother. You might want to sit down. The $200,000 you and Amanda were counting on to solve your financial woes? It was moved yesterday into a newly established trust account that neither of you will ever have access to. Furthermore, my home on Willowbrook has been legally transferred into an irrevocable trust with a reputable management company. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. You and Amanda have precisely 72 hours to vacate the Maple Street property. You will find the lease expires at the end of the month, and I have no intention of renewing it. I will be moving back into my house this weekend. I held the phone as Jason's furious, betrayed shouting dissolved into inarticulate noise. I simply hung up the phone. Mr. James handed Amanda a thick envelope. This contains the legal notice of all proceedings, including the protection order that immediately prevents either you or Jason from making any decisions regarding Mrs. Vance's health, housing, or finances without a court order. All further contact must be through my office. As we walked toward the door, I turned back to face Amanda one last time. She was weeping openly now, her expensive clothes and professional demeanor ruined. By the way, Amanda, I said, my voice low and cutting, I heard every conversation you had with those interior designers about renovating my home. I particularly enjoyed your plans to turn my late husband Thomas's workshop into a wine cellar. That room stays exactly as it is. The sound of Amanda's broken sobs followed us out into the hallway. I felt the warmth of the sun on my face and took a deep, clear breath, filling my ears with the sound of freedom. The horror on her face was worth 25 years of silence, and I felt nothing but profound, intoxicating satisfaction. The drive from Dr. Bennett's office back to Mr. James's downtown firm felt like crossing a historical boundary. I was no longer the silent passenger of my own life. I was the captain, steering toward inevitable confrontation. The rage I had anticipated from Jason was already palpable, transmitted through the frantic, abusive text messages I was now receiving on my old flip phone. He didn't plead, he threatened. He didn't apologize. He demanded an immediate cessation of the legal harassment. The true climax came 2 days later, on Friday afternoon, which marked the effective beginning of the 72-hour eviction window. I wasn't just waiting for them to leave. I was moving back into my own life. I arrived at Jason and Amanda's house on Maple Street, but not alone. Mr. James drove, and a uniformed sheriff's deputy, a quiet, imposing woman, sat in the back seat. Her presence was purely to ensure the peace and enforce the newly issued protection order, which prohibited Jason and Amanda from interfering with my life or finances. When we pulled into the driveway, Jason was waiting. He stood on the manicured lawn, his face contorted with the kind of primal fury that comes from seeing a meticulously constructed financial reality crumble. He was shouting even before I stepped out of the car. "Mom, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he screamed, his navy suit wrinkled and his expensive tie askew. "This is insane. Call off your vulture of a lawyer and talk to me." I stepped out of the car, calm and collected, holding only the small canvas hospital bag and a thick official envelope. "Language, Jason," I said calmly, my voice perfectly pitched, cutting through his rage like a finely sharpened blade. "I am doing precisely what you and Amanda planned to do. I am finalizing the arrangements for my future. The difference is, I am doing it legally and for myself." "We were trying to help you," he yelled, advancing toward me, forcing the deputy to step forward slightly. "You're 70. You can't live alone. You can't hear." "I can hear perfectly, Jason," I countered, looking him directly in the eye. "I heard you tell your business partner, Marcus, that the shock of losing my independence would trigger my depression and confusion, justifying your guardianship claim. Was that helping me?" His face went from furious red to a pale, shocked white. He realized the full extent of my knowledge, and the realization paralyzed him. "Or were you helping me?" I continued, walking slowly past him toward the front door. "When Amanda researched the market value of my house while I was still recovering from experimental surgery." Amanda appeared in the doorway, looking fragile and defeated, her eyes red-rimmed from continuous weeping. She just stood there, unable to meet my gaze. "Mrs. Vance has a valid court order," the deputy stated flatly, placing her hand on her hip. "She is here to retrieve her personal property and ensure her protection. Step away from the door, sir." Jason turned on the deputy, screaming about his rights and his house, but the deputy was unmoved. Mr. James quietly handed Jason a final legal document detailing the immediate enforcement of the protection order. I walked into the house, ignoring the chaos. The house I had spent a week in was no longer a temporary prison. It was a museum of their hypocrisy. I collected only a few essential items: my medication, the small sign language dictionary I no longer needed, and the canvas bag I had brought from the hospital. I looked briefly at the hallway floor where Amanda had dropped the house keys when she thought I was gone for good. Now they were the ones leaving empty-handed. "The house is locked down by the trust as of 5 p.m. today," Mr. James announced to Jason. "Any attempt to access the property or interfere with Mrs. Vance's life will result in immediate arrest for violation of the court order." We didn't linger. We drove away, leaving Jason and Amanda standing on the curb of their leased house, their dream of a stolen fortune dissolved into thin air. The true moment of triumph came when we pulled up to my small ranch-style home in Willowbrook. It looked exactly as I remembered: warm, humble, and fiercely mine. The key felt solid and heavy in my hand. I walked into the living room, a room filled with Thomas's presence and the faint smell of my old rose garden. I heard the satisfying click of the deadbolt as I locked the door behind me. I was home, safe, and the silence was gone, replaced by the profound, beautiful sound of my own independence. The storm was over, and the matriarch had reclaimed her throne. The first week back in my own house in Willowbrook was a period of profound healing quietude. The house, which had once seemed too large for a deaf widow, now felt like a fortress built upon my reclaimed dignity. The sounds here were simple and honest. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant friendly chirping of sparrows in my rose bush, and the familiar, comforting creak of the old wooden floorboards. It was a stark, blessed contrast to the amplified cacophony of deceit I had endured at Jason and Amanda's. Mr. James handled the legal fallout with surgical precision. The temporary protection order was converted into a permanent injunction, legally barring Jason and Amanda from interfering with my life, assets, or medical decisions. The house transfer to the trust was finalized, ensuring its security. I met Mr. James at his office the following week to confirm the full and final separation of my finances. "The $200,000 is securely in the trust," Mr. James confirmed, tapping a ledger. "Your retirement funds are ring-fenced. They cannot touch a single cent. Furthermore, the lease on the Maple Street property was allowed to expire. Their attempt to contest the eviction was dismissed. They are now officially without a primary residence, a direct result of their own misguided planning." I nodded, the news confirming what I already knew. The legal system had served its purpose. It had protected the innocent and punished the guilty. The emotional residue, however, was harder to process. I had lost a son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of my love and sacrifice. But the Jason who called me a worthless burden and plotted my confinement was a stranger, a creature of entitlement and greed. The grief was real, but it was overshadowed by the peace of knowing the betrayal was final. My next focus was the future of my assets. I couldn't simply keep the $200,000 for myself. It was money earned through sacrifice, and it had been intended to build a future. I had planned to leave it to my grandchildren, Oliver and Sophia, but I couldn't risk it falling into Jason and Amanda's hands or rewarding children raised under such a corrupted value system. I instructed Mr. James to establish the Thomas Vance Memorial Fund for single parents' vocational training. The mission was highly specific: to provide full tuition and living stipends for single parents, like I had been, seeking to complete vocational training or certification in high-demand trades. It was a direct investment in true, earned independence, the very thing Jason and Amanda had tried to steal from me. This was my true legacy. The money would now fuel genuine aspirations, giving deserving individuals the financial leverage I had always provided Jason, but without the expectation of emotional servitude. The detachment from Jason was brutal but necessary. He tried one last desperate maneuver, a tearful voice message left on my new phone, pleading for one last chance to talk. "Mom, I know I messed up, but Amanda put so much pressure on me. We're on the streets. We have nowhere to go. Please just give me a loan from the sale of the house. You owe me that much after everything I went through after Dad died." He still didn't apologize for his actions. He only apologized for the consequences. He still saw me as a bottomless resource, not a mother he had betrayed. I deleted the voicemail without replying. The umbilical cord, stretched thin by 2 decades of silence and finally severed by his greed, was gone forever. I focused instead on my new life. I began painting again, a hobby I had abandoned after losing my hearing. I could now listen to classical music, a pleasure Thomas and I had shared, while I worked. I hired a gardener to help with the backyard, chatting easily with him about roses and soil. My lawyer confirmed that Jason and Amanda had moved into a small, temporary apartment in a neighboring town, their financial situation dire due to their debt and the collapse of Jason's consultancy. which I had ensured was fully scrutinized during the legal proceedings. They had lost everything they valued: their home, their social standing, and their assumed inheritance. As I sat on my porch, enjoying the sound of rain falling, a sound I hadn't truly experienced in 25 years, I realized the true gift of my restored hearing. It hadn't just restored a sense, it had restored my self-worth and exposed the toxic relationships that were suffocating me. The silence was over, and the sound of my future was clear, purposeful, and entirely my own. The subsequent months were dedicated to the quiet, profound process of rebuilding Martha Vance. The physical healing from the surgery was swift, but the emotional recovery from the betrayal was measured by the simple, profound acts of independence I took daily. I rediscovered the joy of listening to vinyl records on the old A Non-Disclosed audio brand turntable Thomas had gifted me decades ago. I enrolled in a local pottery class, finally able to fully engage in the verbal instructions without relying solely on the visual demonstrations. The house became a canvas for my new life. I renovated the laundry room, the very room that had served as my temporary prison, turning it into a functional, light-filled home study where I could research the new Thomas Vance Memorial Fund. Every choice was mine, free from the judgment or greed of Jason and Amanda. The most delicate part of the aftermath was the relationship with my grandchildren, Oliver and Sophia. They were now aware of the dramatic split, the sudden loss of their parents' financial standing, and the legal notices, but they did not know the full clinical truth of their parents' scheme. Sophia, my 19-year-old granddaughter, reached out first. A simple text message sent through a secure messaging app. "Grandma, I miss you. Can we just talk? I'm so confused." I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, the A Non-Disclosed park near her school. When she saw me, her initial shock was palpable. She still spoke slowly, moving her lips, a habit ingrained over 2 decades. "Grandma, you look normal," she signed, then spoke the words slowly. "I am normal, dear," I replied, using a clear conversational voice. "I can hear you perfectly, Sophia." Her eyes filled with immediate tears, not of sadness, but astonishment. "It really worked? Mom and Dad said Dr. Bennett said it was inconclusive, maybe a partial improvement." I didn't launch into the details of the audio recordings or the real estate appraisals. Instead, I focused on the core truth. "I can hear everything, Sophia. And what I realized when I could hear was that my life, my home, and my money were no longer safe with your parents. I chose independence over obligation." I showed her the documentation for the Thomas Vance Memorial Fund, explaining that the money would now go toward helping single parents build stability, just as I had struggled to do. I made it clear that while I loved her and Oliver, my life had to be strictly separate from her parents' choices. Oliver, my 22-year-old grandson, contacted me a few weeks later. He was more pragmatic and asked about the details of the financial collapse. I simply sent him the legal documents regarding the trust and the protection order. He drew his own conclusions about his parents' actions and the truth behind the incompetency claims. The path to reconciliation was slow and tentative, based solely on mutual respect and honesty. I allowed them to visit my house, but only under 2 strict, unspoken rules. They were never to discuss their parents' plight or finances, and they were required to talk to me like a normal person, using their real, unexaggerated voices. The biggest step in my journey to reclaiming my life was planning my first trip. For years, Thomas and I had dreamed of taking a guided tour through the historic, A Non-Disclosed European city. The thought had always been impossible due to my deafness. I would miss all the lectures, the atmosphere, the ambient noise of a foreign land. Now it was possible. I booked a solo trip, a 7-day historical tour, complete with an audio headset. I didn't need to ask for permission or worry about the expense. The flight was scheduled for the coming month. As I packed my suitcase, I found the old, worn sign language dictionary. I didn't shred it or throw it away. I placed it gently into a keepsake box, not as a reminder of a handicap, but as a symbol of the profound resilience I had developed in the silence. I was 70 years old, armed with sharp hearing, full legal protection, a secure financial legacy dedicated to helping others, and a plane ticket to a new beginning. I had exchanged a life of invisible servitude for one of tangible, audible freedom. The conclusion of my story wasn't marked by a dramatic confrontation or a courtroom victory. It was marked by the peaceful, profound sound of my own restored life. My greatest revenge was simply living well, audibly, independently, and ethically. The Thomas Vance Memorial Fund was officially launched. I hosted the inaugural meeting in the light-filled study that had once been the despised laundry room. The foundation's purpose was already attracting applications from desperate, hard-working single parents seeking vocational training, people who needed a genuine lift, not a handout based on false entitlement. This was the true, honest legacy of the money I had sacrificed so much to save. My personal life was equally revolutionized. I took that solo trip to a non-disclosed European city, standing in the magnificent main square. I placed the audio headset over my ears and listened to the tour guide's voice, clear and detailed, narrating the history of the ancient cathedral. I heard the distant chime of the bells, the babble of foreign languages, and the sound of my own deep, satisfied sigh. For 25 years, I had seen the world in silence. Now, I was experiencing it fully, gloriously, with all my senses engaged. The silence that surrounded Jason and Amanda's lives was, predictably, deafening. Their meticulously curated social media presence vanished. The financial collapse forced Jason to take a low-paying, entry-level accounting job at a large corporate firm, a crushing blow to his ego and his former status as a consultant. Amanda made one final pathetic attempt at public manipulation. She posted a long, tearful video on a fringe social media platform, claiming she and Jason were victims of a vindictive, mentally unstable elderly relative who had manipulated her savings. She claimed my surgery was a sham, designed purely to seize control of their future. The response was muted. The legal documents confirming the protection order and the financial transfers, which Mr. James had been careful to release certain details of, spoke louder than her performance. Their reputation was annihilated, not by my anger, but by the cold, hard evidence of their own greed. I heard about their downfall through the periphery, a quiet conversation with the gardener, a brief mention from Oliver. I felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only the quiet confirmation that my actions were just and necessary. I had saved myself from a lifetime of emotional and financial imprisonment. I maintained polite but firm contact with Oliver and Sophia. They had accepted the reality that their grandmother's house and money were permanently beyond their parents' reach, and they had begun to understand the complexity of the betrayal. Sophia even spent a weekend with me, helping me organize applications for the foundation. We talked, really talked, about her college plans and her own struggles with her parents' impossible expectations. One afternoon, while working in the former workshop of my late husband Thomas, which remained exactly as he left it, filled with the comforting smell of sawdust, I took a moment to reflect. The greatest truth I learned was this: The most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone believes is not listening. My deafness had made me invisible, but it had also taught me patience and how to read the hidden language of the face. My restored hearing gave me the ultimate weapon, the unheard truth. I had traded a son who saw me as an obligation for a life defined by my own choices. I sold the old, uncomfortable furniture from the Maple Street house that I had helped pay for, donating the proceeds to a local women's shelter. The final act of detachment was complete. My life at 70 was not winding down. It was expanding, filled with the rich, beautiful sounds of music, laughter, and the genuine, unscripted voices of people who respected me. I had been silenced for 25 years, but when I finally spoke, the sound of my voice brought down a kingdom built on lies and built a new one dedicated to truth and kindness. My reckoning was complete. What was the most shocking part of Jason and Amanda's plot? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, your true story matters. Send your experience confidentially to womenstoriess@gmail.com. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.